Usually when we talk about a person's identity, we tend to think of it like an anchor.
Right, like this heavy, solid thing.
Exactly. Just this unmoving metal thing you drop down to keep you from drifting. You just say, this is who I am and that's it. It's fixed.
It implies permanence, yeah, like a fixed coordinate in the world.
But then, if you look at one of the world's oldest continuous religious traditions, suddenly that anchor is it's just gone. We're looking at Taoism today, and honestly, their concept of identity is, well, it's more like the act of sailing itself.
Which is to say it's the absolute definition of a dynamic, ever-changing process.
So if identity isn't this fixed anchor, how do you keep the whole ship from falling apart over like 2,000 years? Today, we are cracking open a really fascinating scholarly compilation called Daoist Identity, History, Lineage, and Ritual, edited by Livia Kohn and Harold D. Roth to try and figure that out.
It's a great collection, really dives into the mechanics of it all.
Yeah, we're going to explore how a tradition that absorbed everything from, popular magic to strict bureaucratic law somehow managed to maintain a cohesive self. And I think by understanding how Taoists constructed their identity, you might just rethink how you construct your own. I mean, okay, let's unpack this. The word identity actually comes from the Latin word idem, which literally means sameness.
Right, but to really understand Taoism, we have to kind of flip that Latin definition entirely on its head.
So it's not about sameness at all.
Not in the static sense, no. Taoist identity is not a static substance. To frame how this actually works, the text brings in a sociologist of religion named Hans Moll, and he coined this concept called sacralization.
Sacralization, okay.
Yeah, so sacralization is basically the process of taking certain patterns of behavior or thought and elevating them to a sacred status. You do this to create stability in a world that is just inherently chaotic.
Okay, so making things sacred to keep the chaos out. How does a group actually do that? Well, Moll argues it happens through four pillars. So you have objectivation, which is creating a tangible system of, like, beliefs or texts.
Right.
Then commitment, which is the emotional bond to the group. Then you have ritual, formal, repetitive behavior. And finally, myth, which are the stories that reinforce it all. So identity is really the active, daily balancing of those four moving parts.
Okay, so if sacralization is essentially this process of bringing disparate people together under those four pillars, I would just assume this whole movement started with, like, a small group of elite, ethnically homogenous Chinese philosophers sitting around writing scrolls.
You would think so, right. But the reality is much more radical. To see the first major shift in how Taoist identity was forged, we have to look at 2nd century Sichuan.
Same century.
Yeah, the early Taoist movement, specifically this group known as the Celestial Masters, was intensely multi-ethnic. A massive part of their early demographic was actually the Bei people of Sichuan.
The Bei people, who were they? They were this martial hunter-gatherer society. They were completely distinct from the ethnic Chinese Han majority, like completely different. The Ba were famous for these fierce Bayu dances, and they had a deeply rooted cultural system that was centered around tiger worship.
Wait, tiger worship?
Oh, yeah, we are talking about a mythology filled with war tigers and, powerful tiger spirits. And yet, this entire society joined the emerging Taoist movement en masse.
But if they're joining this brand new religious movement, I assume that means abandoning their old gods, right? Like the tiger spirits have to go to make room for the Tao.
See, that is the brilliance of early Taoist integration. They didn't erase the Ba's identity. They didn't demand total cultural assimilation at all.
Really? They let them keep the tigers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead, they offered a framework where the Ba could maintain their distinct cultural identity while simultaneously adopting a Taoist one.
Huh. It sounds less like a rigid corporation demanding uniformity and more like an open source operating system. Like the Taoists provided the underlying spiritual and social architecture, and the Ba were allowed to run their own cultural software like the tiger worship right on top of it.
That is a perfect way to look at it, an open source operating system. And the reason the Ba were so eager to adopt this new system really comes down to social justice.
How so?
Well, at the time, the Han dynasty state was heavily taxing and just generally oppressing the Ba people, which led to constant bloody rebellions. So the early Taoists stepped into this chaos and offered a completely parallel society.
Oh, wow. So they just bypassed the government.
Entirely. Yeah. Instead of exorbitant government taxes, the Taoists instituted a flat, simple tithe of just 5 bushels of rice. That's it. They also established these lodges of righteousness that provided food and shelter for the poor.
That's incredible.
Right. And most crucially, They offered this utopian millenarian vision. It was a prophecy that the current corrupt world would soon end, and it would be replaced by a great peace. And in this new era, ethnic Chinese and the Ba people would live as absolute equals, sharing a common identity as chosen seed people.
So they completely bypassed a failing oppressive monopoly by offering better services and, actual equality to marginalized communities. It's like a disruptive tech startup.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
And this mechanism of using Taoism to protect a marginalized identity, it isn't just ancient history.
Hmm.
The text actually points to a fascinating modern parallel with the Yao people, who are an ethnic minority living in Southeast Asia today.
Okay, what's their connection?
Centuries ago, the Yao adopted this really archaic universal form of the Daoist priesthood. Now, the thing is, ethnic Chinese communities abandoned this specific social structure a long time ago, but the Yao held on to it.
Wait, but how does adopting a profoundly Chinese religion help an ethnic minority keep from being assimilated into Chinese culture? That seems backward.
It does seem counterintuitive, but by adopting the Daoist priesthood universally among their men, the Yao essentially walled themselves off. They created their own internal hierarchy of authority based on cosmic law.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, which meant they didn't need to rely on Han Chinese civil magistrates or, external officials to officiate their marriages or perform community rituals or even settle internal disputes. They used the dominant culture's own religious operating system to become entirely self-sufficient. They created a parallel society that insulated them from cultural erasure.
That is incredibly clever. But I have to wonder, if you're running this massive open source community with all these different ethnic groups and parallel societies, you need a way to keep the system from crashing.
Oh, absolutely.
There has to be some mechanism for internal discipline. And from what I read, in early Taoism, breaking the rules didn't just get you excommunicated or put in timeout, it made you physically, literally ill.
Yes, the consequences were entirely somatic. To understand how they viewed discipline, we have to look at the cosmology laid out in an ancient text called the Taiping Jing, or the Scripture of Great Peace.
Right.
In their view, heaven, earth, and humanity are not separate spheres. They are intimately physically linked by qi, which is vital energy. So when a human being commits a sin when they break the rules of the community, that evil act physically alters their qi.
It changes their actual energy.
Right. It severs the harmonic flow of energy between the individual and heaven. This moral failing defiles the physical body, which causes the pure spirits that normally reside inside your internal organs to flee in disgust.
Wait, spirits live in your organs?
Yes, and without those animating spirits, you become violently sick.
Meaning you can't just, take a medicinal herb to fix a moral failing? The underlying code is broken.
Precisely. Medicine was considered totally useless for this kind of defilement. The only cure was confession. The sick person would be placed in total isolation in what they called a chamber of tranquility.
That sounds intense.
It was. They were required to reflect on their sins, kowtow, which means striking their forehead against the ground in submission, beat their breasts in remorse, and ingest talisman water.
Talisman water.
Yeah, it was water mixed with the dissolved ashes of a sacred written spell. So they enacted this highly physical, self-inflicted punishment.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. Looking at this through a modern psychological lens, it sounds like they intuitively invented a psychosomatic stress relief program.
How do you mean?
Well, we know that severe guilt causes immense physiological stress, right? Which totally degrades the immune system. So you isolate the person, give them a mechanism to confess, the psychological burden is lifted, the stress vanishes, and their body naturally heals. It's like ancient stress relief.
I mean, it is incredibly tempting to map our modern understanding of psychology onto them, but I really have to push back on that interpretation.
Really? Why?
Because we need to understand the ancient mindset on its own terms. To the early Daoists, heaven wasn't a metaphor for a psychological state. Heaven was a literal functioning bureaucracy.
Literal bureaucracy, like with ledgers.
Exactly. They firmly believed that this self-punishment was necessary to preempt the much harsher physical punishments that heaven's cosmic administration was currently drafting against them. And the mechanics of this communication were entirely biological.
What do you mean biological?
Well, in their system, your intention, which they called yi, is physically generated by your liver, which is why deep sincerity and grief cause you to shed tears. And your thinking, called si, is generated by your spleen.
Okay, so when you are in that chamber of tranquility, feeling genuine remorse, your liver and spleen are basically acting as a biological fax machine, transmitting physical qi directly to the bureaucratic ledgers of Earth and Heaven.
Exactly. You are officially updating your file in the cosmic ledger.
That is wild. Okay, so you've confessed your liver has sent its faxes and you've temporarily balanced your account to avoid sickness. But ultimately, that physical body is still going to break down and die.
Inevitably, yes.
And if heaven's bureaucracy is that strict for the living, the audit you face when you die must be a total nightmare?
Oh, the Taoist solution to death is one of the most brilliant evolutionary leaps in religious history. But to appreciate it, you have to understand how terrified the ancient Chinese were of the dead.
Terrified. I thought they worshipped their ancestors.
Well, eventually, yes. But during the Han Dynasty, before Taoism fully organized, death rituals were purely exorcistic. When an ancestor died, the family hired an exorcist to write up a grave-securing writ.
Like a legal document.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a legally binding cosmic document placed directly in the tomb. Its entire purpose was to legally lock the dead person inside the earth, binding them to the underworld administration so their ghost couldn't escape and harass the living.
So they were basically treating the dead like dangerous criminals being processed into a subterranean prison. Stay in your grave, and here is the signed legal paperwork to prove you have no jurisdiction above ground.
That was exactly the sentiment. But when Taoism emerged, they introduced soteriology, which is a doctrine of salvation. They promised that your spirit didn't have to rot in an underground prison, it could transcend to the celestial heavens. But rather than invent a completely new ritual structure to achieve this, they simply duplicated the old bureaucratic paperwork.
By splitting the journey of the dead in two.
Yeah, I was looking at the Yaxi Qi in the reading the breviary of rules for Taoist funerals.
Yes, exactly.
The physical body still journeyed to the tomb, and they still used the old legal writs to hand the corpse over to the civil servants of the earth to keep it safely locked away. But they added a second set of paperwork for the spirit, which was heading up to heaven.
Right, the celestial commute.
And the details are terrifyingly specific. You had to place exact talismans in the coffin to protect the spirit on its commute because the afterlife was supposedly swarming with demons. Specifically, there were demons of stale vapors, or demons who happened to have a different surname than you, who would actively try to steal your identity or block your path.
Because heaven is a bureaucracy, it is absolutely subject to bureaucratic gridlock and fraud. It sounds like a nightmare visit to the DMV. Like, you're standing in line in the cosmos, and if you don't have the exact right paperwork issued by the celestial elder, you get detained, or a demon literally steals your passport and takes your spot in heaven.
It is a terrifying prospect for the dead, sure, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, sociologically, it is a brilliant compromise for the living.
How so?
Well, the ancient Chinese were caught between a very real terror of ghosts and a deep societal duty to honor their ancestors. The Taoist dual paperwork system solved both problems simultaneously.
Oh, I see.
Right. It legally locked the terrifying, decaying corpse in the ground, neutralizing the fear, while ensuring the pure spirit was promoted to a celestial paradise, fulfilling the filial duty to save the ancestor.
That's just brilliant. But it makes me wonder, where do you even get this paperwork? I mean, you can't just stumble upon the exact spell needed to bypass a demon of stale vapors at the public library. Someone has to write the manual, which brings us to how this incredibly specific knowledge was actually transmitted among the living.
Right, and to grasp that, we need to look at how the Chinese categorized knowledge in general. During the Warring States period, philosophers like Zhuangzi viewed knowledge as fragments of a lost ancient truth. Like everyone just had a small, broken piece of a larger puzzle.
Okay.
Then later, during the Han Dynasty, historians like Sima Qian categorized knowledge strictly by its bureaucratic function. So, this scroll is for military strategy, this one's for agriculture, this one is for medicine.
Very practical.
Exactly. But early Taoism relied on a completely new category that defied both of those. The revealed text.
Meaning it bypassed human authors entirely?
Yes. These texts were ascribed to mythical figures like the Yellow Emperor, or they were said to be derived directly from deities, or the fundamental patterns of nature itself, like the Yijing. Because they were divine, they didn't fragment over time, and they weren't just functional manuals. They were the absolute, unvarnished truth of the universe.
Wow.
And because they contained such raw power, they were transmitted esoterically, meaning secretly, passed from a master to a disciple in private, highly structured salons.
Though private is kind of a relative term here, isn't it? The text mentions a master named Yang Hao who ran a salon with like 3,000 students registered to learn this knowledge.
True. Yeah, some were massive.
But within that transmission, there is this incredible concept of pillow books. These were the ultimate, most powerful texts that a master would literally keep hidden under his head on his deathbed, only passing them to a chosen successor at the very final moment.
Right. The ultimate secret knowledge.
And these weren't just philosophical musings, they contained operational data. True names of spirits, celestial maps, the exact diagrams needed to navigate the cosmic DMV. It sounds highly elitist, like an exclusive, underground, invite-only club. And by locking this knowledge under a dying master's pillow, they were artificially restricting the supply of salvation.
Which is exactly what gave those texts their massive cultural and spiritual value. And this brings us right back to Hans Moll's pillars of sacralization that we started with.
Oh, right. The 4 pillars.
Yeah. The revealed text provides the objectivation of belief, but the artificial scarcity of the salon creates the commitment. By making the knowledge rare and requiring a person to formally join a lineage to access it, Taoism created deep emotional bonds among its followers. That exclusivity laid the sociological groundwork for an organized, cohesive religion that could survive for millennia.
Okay, so we've been talking about identity on this massive societal scale, right? 3,000 student salons, entire ethnic migrations integrating into an open source movement, cosmic administrations managing the living and the dead. But I want to zoom all the way in now.
Okay, let's do it.
How does an individual actually use this heavy ancient machinery to survive their own life? To answer that, we have to jump forward to the Tang Dynasty to meet one of the most fascinating figures in this entire text, Yu Xuanji.
She is a remarkable figure, truly. Yu Xuanji lived from 844 to 868 CE. She was a brilliant intellectual, a celebrated poet, a courtesan, and a formally ordained Daoist nun.
Which is already a wild resume.
It is. And her life ended tragically when she was executed at a very young age for allegedly murdering her maid.
It is such a jarring paradox.
Yeah.
So, what does this all mean? We usually think of Taoism as this pursuit of ultimate cosmic harmony, right? Flowing like water, detached from worldly desires. Yet here is a formally ordained Daoist nun embroiled in passion, societal scandal, and ultimately extreme violence.
It shatters the stereotype, doesn't it?
Yes, shatters it.
But what's fascinating here is that it proves Daoist identity wasn't just reserved for detached, bearded sages meditating on misty mountaintops. It was a lived, messy, earthly reality. For Yu Xuanji, Taoism offered a physical and intellectual haven. Traditional society had deeply wounded her and denied her any real agency because she was a woman. The Taoist organization gave her a physical refuge, sure, but more importantly, Taoist concepts gave her a vocabulary to assert her selfhood. We can trace exactly how she crafted her psychological identity through the material culture referenced in her surviving poetry. She only has about 50 poems that survived, but they're incredibly telling.
Yeah, you can see how traditional society had completely trapped her, and you can feel this incredible physical claustrophobia in her writing. She constantly writes about textiles, these elaborate, stunning white silk Taoist robes with gold embroidery.
Yes, the robes.
But rather than a badge of honor, the textiles feel like a cage. Society is judging her entirely by what she is wearing and the rigid gender roles tied to that fabric. The silk literally weighs her down.
And her only mental escape from that silk cage is the boat. In her poetry, whenever the restrictions of life on land become unbearable, she imagines stepping onto a boat. It symbolizes her freedom and her imaginative wandering with the Tao, drifting away from the societal rules that confined her body.
But even drifting out there on the water, she is desperately lonely. And that is where the third object appears in her work, the zither.
Ah, yes.
She reaches for the stringed musical instrument to symbolize her passionate search for a true equal. She writes about wanting one who recognizes my sound. It's a desperate plea for someone to see past her reputation, past her gender, and understand her true mind. She took this massive, ancient, cosmic religion, and she used it to process her very real, very messy human trauma.
Her identity as a Taoist nun wasn't just about performing rituals or reading pillow books. It was the specific lens through which she demanded to be understood by a world that refused to listen to her.
You know, when we started this deep dive, we were looking for the anchor of Daoist identity, but we found out there isn't one. Identity here is a constant, active process of negotiation. It's the multi-ethnic integration of the Bao people adopting a spiritual operating system. It's the physical reality of a guilty liver faxing apologies to the cosmos.
The cosmic faxes, yes.
Right. It's the bureaucratic hacking of the afterlife to protect ancestors from demonic identity theft, the artificial scarcity of secret salons, and the rebellious poetry of a marginalized woman demanding a voice. It is a ship constantly rebuilding itself while out at sea.
Which leaves us with a profound realization about identity itself. Throughout this exploration, we saw Taoists continually adopting the rigid bureaucratic structures of the empires they lived in.
They did, yeah.
They rebelled against the Han dynasty, but they mirrored its exact structures in the heavens, using ledgers for sins, passports for the afterlife, and official ranks for their priests. They pushed back against the state by becoming a cosmic version of it. So, a final thought to leave you with. If our identity is always shaped by the environment we are pushing against, how much of your own rebellious or independent identity is secretly just mirroring the exact structures of the modern institutions, the corporate ladders, or the social media algorithms that you think you are defying?
Are you charting your own course, or are you just letting the algorithm steer the ship? Wow. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning the architecture of your own identity, and we will catch you next time.